At school, they teach memorization, but not thinking. Have you ever considered that the very system created to educate us might also be the one that most severely limits us? Imagine being born with an innate sense of wonder, a natural desire to explore, to question, and to experience the world in its raw and vibrant state. Then imagine being placed in a room at a desk surrounded by walls, strict schedules, tests, and rules. Now picture spending over a decade there, day after day, year after year. What if I told you that many of the thoughts you believe are your own, many of the dreams you've abandoned, and much of the anxiety you carry are not yours at all, but were subtly planted, shaped, and reinforced by an invisible mechanism? A mechanism that begins its work the moment you're old enough to hold a pencil. And what if I told you that by the end of this video, you will clearly see the ways, both subtle and overt, in which this mechanism operates and how to break free from it? The final insight we'll share will be the most powerful of all, because it doesn't just explain the problem, it offers the key to reclaiming your mind. So stay until the end. But before we dive deeper, if you are someone who is passionate about psychology, philosophy, and decoding the hidden layers of human behavior, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. What was school like for you? Did it awaken your potential or suppress it? Your story matters, and it might just inspire someone else who has been silently questioning the same things. Let's begin this journey by asking a painful but necessary question. What is the true purpose of school? On the surface, we are told it is about education, about preparing us for life. But as Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, once noted, the greatest achievements of the human mind are often those it accomplishes in spite of, not because of, institutional education. Schopenhauer saw schools as places of conformity, not of liberation. He argued that true knowledge comes from reflection, from suffering, and from confronting life directly, not from memorizing lifeless facts for tests we forget within a week. Nietzsche, too, was critical of formal education. For him, schooling was a factory of mediocrity. State education, he wrote, makes the individual superfluous. It seeks not the exceptional, but the average. And herein lies one of the first wounds that school inflicts upon us from childhood. It teaches us to fear standing out, to shrink ourselves into sameness, to value obedience over originality, and to chase gold stars and grades instead of truth. From the moment a child enters the system, they are taught to raise their hand to speak, to ask for permission to use the bathroom, and to sit for hours on end, regardless of how their body or mind feels. This is not education, it's conditioning. The goal isn't to nurture the individual, but to shape a compliant worker, a predictable consumer, and a quiet citizen. Think about this. When was the last time school taught you to truly know yourself, to understand your emotions, or to trust your intuition? Instead, we were trained to look outward for answers, to doubt our inner voice, and to compare, compete, and conform. This goes deeper than we think. When children express curiosity or creativity that doesn't fit the curriculum, they are often labeled disruptive. A child who questions too much is seen as a problem. But as Schopenhauer warned, talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. Yet schools often punish the very minds that see what others can't. They smother the visionary to protect the standard. And the damage is not just intellectual, it's emotional. How many of us carry a subtle, persistent feeling of inadequacy because of grades we received in school? How many still fear speaking up because a teacher once mocked us in front of the class? How many stopped painting, writing, singing, or dreaming because someone told us we weren't good enough? School teaches us to attach our self-worth to performance, to external validation. And when that validation doesn't come, we begin to shrink inside. This is not by accident. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that systems of control survive by manufacturing weakness. He argued that society, including its educational systems, often seeks to tame the wildness of the human spirit to mold individuals into something predictable and manageable. The school, in this view, becomes a training ground for obedience, not for excellence. And this obedience often extends beyond the classroom. Once conditioned, we continue to seek approval from bosses, institutions, and even social media likes, rarely questioning the system itself. We become excellent at playing roles but poor at knowing who we truly are underneath the mask. But here's a deeper question. What if the very anxiety, burnout, and existential confusion so many adults feel today is not a flaw of the individual, but a symptom of a childhood spent in a system that never taught us how to think, only what to think? This is why both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer stress solitude, self-reflection, and suffering as paths to true knowledge. They believe that only by breaking away from herd thinking could one become truly free. Nietzsche, in particular, championed the idea of the Übermensch, the self-overcoming human who creates their own values, breaks their own chains, and refuses to be shaped by systems that diminish them. But how do we do that? How do we undo years, sometimes decades of programming? How do we begin to question the unquestionable? And most importantly, how do we reclaim our minds, not just intellectually, but spiritually, emotionally, and existentially? In the next part, we'll explore how the school system was designed, not randomly or neutrally, but as a reflection of industrial-age needs, where human beings were treated more like cogs than consciousness. You'll see how these historical roots still shape modern schooling, and why understanding that origin is the first step to freeing yourself from it. We'll also begin to uncover what real education looks like, according to philosophers, psychologists, and mystics who dare to think differently. But first, ask yourself this: what part of you did you leave behind in school? And is it time to go back and reclaim it? Let me know in the comments. And when you're ready, I'll take you deeper. Imagine for a moment that you are not a person, but a product to be shaped, packaged, and delivered into a society that values efficiency, productivity, and predictability above all else. Would your upbringing look any different? This is not a dystopian metaphor. It's the historical reality behind modern education. The school system we know today was not born from a desire to nurture wisdom or to awaken the soul. It emerged from the industrial age, when factories required disciplined, punctual, and obedient workers. In other words, schools were designed not to enlighten, but to produce. And if you look closely, you'll see the remnants of the factory blueprint everywhere. Bells that ring to signal shifts, uniforms, rows of desks, and standardized testing. Students are grouped not by passion or capacity, but by age, as if growth were mechanical, not organic. We were trained not to think deeply, but to follow instructions, not to create, but to replicate. This, as Nietzsche would say, is the triumph of the herd over the individual. Think back to your school years. How much of your time was spent memorizing rather than understanding, repeating rather than questioning, conforming rather than exploring? Now ask yourself, what did that do to your mind? The true cost is not just what we were taught, but what we were not taught. Schools rarely encouraged emotional literacy. They almost never nurtured existential inquiry. Instead of asking, "Who are you really?" or "What do you love deeply enough to suffer for?" we were told to choose a career path at 18 based on grades, prestige, or practicality. As Schopenhauer observed, the task is not so much to see what no one else has yet seen, but to think what nobody yet has thought about, that which everybody sees. But schools do not reward such thinking. They reward compliance, and slowly the spark dims. The child who once asked why 100 times a day begins to ask, "Will this be on the test?" This is the subtle destruction of the mind. And this destruction doesn't stop at graduation. The students who survive this process often carry deep wounds into adulthood: fear of failure, dependence on authority, and discomfort with uncertainty. They may excel in their professions, yet feel spiritually vacant. They may chase goals relentlessly, yet wonder why they never feel fulfilled. Why? Because the system never taught them how to live. It only taught them how to function. Nietzsche called this the death of authenticity. He believed that when we allow society's values to override our own, we become estranged from our true nature. We become actors in someone else's script. You see, both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer believed that life's deepest meaning could not be given. It had to be created. And that creation begins with unlearning, with questioning, and with stepping outside the walls, both literal and mental, that have confined us. So let us now ask, what is real education? It's not the memorization of disconnected facts. It's not the pursuit of grades. Real education is the art of learning how to think, not what to think. It's the cultivation of the inner world. It's the courage to explore ideas that make us uncomfortable. And above all, it's the commitment to know ourselves. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, echoed this sentiment. He once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet how can one become when they've been shaped their entire life to be something else?" In ancient Greece, education, or paideia, was not a bureaucratic institution. It was a sacred process of forming the soul. It included philosophy, poetry, music, ethics, and physical training. The goal wasn't merely to prepare a citizen, but to awaken a human being. To educate was to lead the soul out of ignorance toward light. Somewhere along the way, we lost this vision, and that loss has consequences. A person who has never truly questioned their beliefs, who has never wandered into the dark forests of doubt and self-reflection, is more easily manipulated, more easily afraid, and more easily controlled, because they have no internal compass, only external scripts. This is why philosophers like Nietzsche insisted on a kind of spiritual rebellion, not for the sake of anarchy, but for the sake of becoming real. He wrote, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." But finding your why requires more than school can give you. It requires a personal revolution. Now let's pause and reflect. Can you remember a time when your curiosity was punished? When your creativity was mocked? When you were told to sit down, shut up, and follow instructions, when all you wanted was to express what was alive inside of you? These moments don't just pass. They shape the architecture of our inner world. They teach us what is safe and what is not, what is rewarded and what is rejected. And slowly we internalize the lessons. Don't be too loud. Don't be too different. Don't be too much. Until one day we forget who we were before the conditioning began. But what if we could remember? What if we could return to the place where the fire was first lit, before it was smothered by routine and expectation? In the next part of this video, we will explore how to begin this inner awakening. We'll turn to tools from existential psychology, Eastern philosophy, and modern neuroscience to understand how we can deconstruct the mental architecture built by years of miseducation. You will learn why discomfort is essential for growth, how solitude can become your greatest teacher, and why Nietzsche believed that suffering isn't a curse, but a doorway to strength. But before we move on, I want to ask you a question. If you were never graded, never compared, never told who to be, who would you have become? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you've ever felt like school taught you how to be anything but yourself, you are not alone. The journey to reclaim your mind has already begun. Let us begin with a radical but liberating truth. The pain you carry from school is not a personal failure. It is the result of a system designed to mold you, not to empower you. But here's the good news. What was built inside of you can be dismantled, and what was buried can be remembered. To begin this process, we must confront one of the greatest myths imposed on us through years of institutional education. The idea that discomfort is something to avoid. From childhood, we are trained to chase certainty, to cling to familiar answers, and to avoid failure at all costs. Mistakes are penalized. Questions without quick answers are dismissed. We learn to fear the unknown. But Nietzsche saw things differently. For him, the discomfort of questioning, of doubting, and of suffering wasn't a flaw. It was the path. He famously wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, the confusion, the inner conflict, the burning questions with no clear answers, is not a sign of weakness. It is the raw material of transformation. Yet school teaches us the opposite. It teaches us that knowledge is neat, linear, and final. But real knowledge, the kind that shakes the soul awake, is often messy, cyclical, and unfinished. This is why so many people leave school with degrees but feel lost. Because true education, self-education, cannot be given. It must be earned in solitude, reflection, and courageous inquiry. Carl Jung, in his exploration of the unconscious mind, discovered that the parts of ourselves we are told to suppress, our wildness, our emotions, our individuality, do not disappear. They sink into the shadow, and from there, they wait. And often, they wait in silence for decades. He called this the unconscious aspect of the personality which the ego does not recognize in itself. It is often born in childhood, especially in systems like school, which reward only certain behaviors and punish others. So what happens when we live according to these suppressions, when we follow rules that were never meant to protect us but to control us? We become strangers to ourselves. We act, but we do not feel. We perform, but we do not live. We forget the voice that once whispered to us about dreams and passions that had nothing to do with exams or job titles. To heal from this, Jung insisted, we must confront the shadow. We must bring to light the parts of ourselves we were taught to hide. The anger, the longing, the desire to break the rules and follow something deeper. But doing this takes courage, because once you start to unlearn what school taught you, the world may look very different. You may realize that you were never meant to sit in silence for 8 hours a day, that your value cannot be measured by a grade point average, that your intelligence may not be logical or mathematical, but emotional, intuitive, creative, or spiritual. And here's the liberating part. Once you reclaim this truth, no institution, no degree, no authority can ever take it from you again. So, how do we begin? First, by embracing solitude. This was a practice central to both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. For them, solitude was not loneliness, it was liberation. It was the sacred space in which one could hear their own thoughts again, without the noise of expectation. Schopenhauer would often walk for hours alone, letting the chaos of the world settle. Nietzsche, too, believed that true clarity came only when we stepped away from the herd. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded, he warned. That is the nature of living creatures. To obey yourself means to know yourself. And to know yourself, you must sometimes step outside everything you were taught. Second, engage in what Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, called logotherapy, the pursuit of meaning. Frankl discovered that even in the darkest conditions imaginable, human beings could survive if they had a reason to live. And this reason, your why, is not found in textbooks. It is found in your suffering, your questions, and your deepest longings. It is forged not in the classroom, but in the fire of life itself. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you asked, what gives my life meaning? Not just what career to pursue or what goals to achieve, but what makes you feel alive? School never asked you that, but life does, and you must answer. Third, we must restore the broken connection between mind and body, intellect and intuition. Modern education exalts the intellect and ignores the body, the heart, and the soul. We are taught to live in our heads, but human beings are not machines. They are complex, emotional, sensory beings. Nietzsche, for all his brilliance, never divorced thought from the body. He saw the will to power not just as dominance, but as vitality, as a life force. He urged us to live with intensity, to embrace the totality of experience, not just ideas, but feelings, instincts, and desires. To reclaim your mind, you must also reclaim your body, your energy, your rhythm, and your passions. So begin listening not just to thoughts, but to what stirs your soul, what excites you, what drains you, and what you love before they told you what to love. And finally, you must give yourself permission. Permission to be wrong, to change your mind, to evolve, to walk away from a path that was never yours, and to start again. Because the most dangerous lie school teaches is that once you fall behind, it's too late. But in truth, it is never too late to return to yourself. In the final part of this video, we will uncover the most powerful insight of all, the one idea that both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche pointed to, but that only you can fully realize. It is the revelation that not only can you escape the conditioning, but you can become someone entirely new. You can become the creator of your own values, your own education, and your own life. You can choose meaning over safety, authenticity over approval, and depth over speed. You can transform the wounds of the past into wisdom for the future. But for that, one final step remains, and it is the most difficult and the most necessary. So ask yourself now, before we continue, what belief taught to you in school do you still carry that no longer serves you? And what would it take to finally let it go? The answer is coming. You've come a long way. You've looked into the machine that shaped your early mind. You've questioned beliefs that were handed to you as truths. You've seen how conformity was rewarded and how curiosity, so natural, so vital, was often met with silence or scorn. But now we come to the final and most powerful revelation. The revelation is this: you were never meant to fit into the system. You were meant to outgrow it. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche both understood something few dare to accept. Systems, by their nature, cannot make you whole. They are designed to control, to standardize, and to limit. But you are not a standard. You are not a machine. You are not meant to simply function. You are meant to awaken. An awakening begins when you no longer ask, "What was I trained to believe?" but instead ask, "What is true, deeply and authentically for me?" Nietzsche described this moment as the birth of the Übermensch, not a perfect or superior human in a superficial sense, but a person who creates their own values. Someone who breaks from the herd and builds a life from the ground up, guided not by the rules of society, but by the fire of their own spirit. The Übermensch is not afraid to destroy illusions, to stand alone, to suffer meaningfully, and to create joyfully. This is not rebellion for its own sake. It is liberation, the liberation of the self from false identities, false duties, and false dreams. Schopenhauer too believed that freedom was possible, but only through deep introspection, detachment, and a willingness to see through the delusions of the world. He saw life as suffering, yes, but not as despair. For him, suffering could become wisdom if faced directly without the filters of social conditioning. And that's where school failed us the most. It taught us to avoid suffering, not to understand it. It taught us to memorize answers, not to live the questions. But today you begin to live differently. You begin to see that the fear you were taught, to fail, to speak out, to take your own path, was never really yours. It was borrowed, imposed, and rehearsed, and it can be unlearned. So what now? Now you become your own teacher. You craft your own education, not in the form of credentials, but in the form of curiosity. You read what moves your soul. You study what deepens your understanding of the world. You learn from life directly, from solitude, from silence, from beauty, from pain. Now you become your own authority. You stop outsourcing your worth to institutions, resumes, or approval. You stop asking permission to be who you already are. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces that never saw your fullness to begin with. And now you choose your own meaning. You don't inherit it. You don't download it. You create it through action, through reflection, through the slow and sacred work of becoming real. But this is not easy. You will lose people. You will feel lost at times. You will be tempted to return to the safety of systems, to the comfort of old roles, and to the illusion of certainty. But as Nietzsche warned, the snake which cannot cast its skin has to die. As well the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions. They cease to be mind. You must shed. Shed the need to be perfect. Shed the voice that says you're behind. Shed the belief that only authority grants value. Shed the shame of not being what school expected you to be. And in that shedding, you will find a self more ancient than the systems, more wild than the rules, and more alive than the grades. You will find your true education, because here's the final truth. School ends, but education doesn't. Education in its truest form is life itself. It is what happens when you step into uncertainty with curiosity, when you face suffering with open eyes, when you turn wounds into wisdom and confusion into clarity, when you realize that every moment, every failure, every breakthrough, and every silence is your classroom. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." That is your assignment now, not from a teacher, not from a system, but from life itself. And you cannot fail it unless you refuse to begin. So start. Ask questions that scare you. Read authors who challenge you. Walk into spaces where no one claps but your soul sings. Let your education be wild, unpredictable, and beautiful. Let it be yours. And above all, remember, you are not broken. You were never broken. You were only buried beneath expectations, beneath conditioning, beneath the heavy silence of unspoken dreams. And now you are rising, not as the student you were trained to be, but as the human you were born to become. So I leave you with this. What would your life look like if you stopped living it as a product of the system and started living it as a creation of your own soul? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share your truth. Someone out there is waiting for the courage you're about to give them. And if this journey stirred something inside you, subscribe, share, and help us awaken others. The world doesn't need more obedience, it needs more aliveness. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson never taught. Until next time, question deeply, live freely, and never stop becoming. Thanks for looking.